answer your questions, I mean, on whatever level you might want to talk. Yeah.
What is the status of the Navajo relocation matter?
I thought you might ask that. So I was online this afternoon looking up. It's very complicated. Bottom line is that there are some holdouts, so several hundred holdouts. But the real significant thing is that Peabody's license has been revoked. This is a water quality issue. They have been polluting, the film goes into it, the degradation of the water quality, the water table. So a judge in January pulled their permit. So the double tragedy of relocation is now there's no reason to relocate people. If Peabody can't operate, why did all these people have to suffer? I mean, that's the mind-blowing revelation for me of today, really, literally today.
Are there criminal charges being leveled?
Oh, no.
The situation is a really complex situation. When we were talking about doing the film, 26 years ago, there was all this very dramatic footage that Victoria was getting of the conflicts that were going on out there. And in order to try and explain to people what was happening, we realized that we're going to have to tell like the whole history of the Navajo and Hopi tribes in order to make it even make anywhere near sense, which is why you see the film all of a sudden took off like that, because we realized we had to put it in context. The dispute actually began back in the 1930s. And what happened in the 1930s is that the government hired oil surveyors who went around the Hopi mesas firing off dynamite. Now, when that happened, a lot of Hopi children had been taken off the reservation and sent to Oklahoma and other places, and they were not allowed to come back to the reservation because they said that since they had abandoned the reservation, they no longer lived there and they had no rights. The Hopi kids that did come back, and I knew some of the guys from that era, when they came back home, they heard this dynamite going off, and their parents were saying, we don't know what's going on, but the government's doing dynamite. And they said, oh, that's why they didn't want us to come back. We've been in Oklahoma. That's how they look for oil. They set off dynamite and they look at the echo patterns, and so what they're doing is they're looking for oil. This is in the 1930s. At that point, they had already mapped out the area and they knew where the shale oil deposits were, but the technology was such at that time that it was too expensive to extract the oil. So they said, we're going to leave the oil in place, leave the shale oil in place, but we're going to start to divide the land up so that the tribes can't control it. And that's when they began this discussion of a Hopi land dispute between the Navajo and the Hopi. And that continued on, but it reignited during this period because the technology had come to such a point that they thought they could profitably extract the oil that they had measured originally in 1934. And that whole process is so complicated to try and explain that it's really tough. This that we were looking at here was created because the government said all the Navajo and Hopi in that area had to be out by June 1985, or they were going to go in with the army and take them out. The American Indian movement and others said, well, we want to see a fight, and they started bringing guns up there. And everyone knew that there was going to be a massacre up on the reservation in June 1985. People were holding their breath all over America who knew about this. The Big Mountain Defense Fund was out in the streets. People were selling blankets. People were doing everything to try and raise money. And Victoria and Maria Florio started this film project because they thought there must be a more peaceful way of approaching than this with guns. By exposing the government's intentions, we might be able to stop them. And at that point, they called me, because I was one of a number of people in the community, but I was kind of well known at that point. And they asked me if I would participate in the film with them. I went and looked at shots, rushes of the film, and I saw it was very real. Everything they had captured was very real. These were real Navajo people, real Hopi people, true community members, and it looked like a true effort, not a do-gooder effort, but a real effort. And I said, yeah, all right, I'll throw in with you. And early on, we all decided that the film was going to have to win the Academy Award in order to embarrass the government. If the film was just lost and buried, like most documentaries, it would do no good. But if we could make the film in such a way that it could win the Academy Award, then the government would have to take notice. And the purpose of the film was not to do anything except, the way I remember it, was to stop that bloodbath that was gonna happen in June 1985.
That's not how I
All
remember
right,
it
that's fine,
actually at
that's
all.
fine.
I mean,
That's fine.
as it happened, I mean, the PR about bloodbath was simply PR. There was tension, but there was nothing like a violent situation. I was asked to make the film by Mina Lanza, who is the traditional, the Kickmungee of Old Arrivee, and I used to hang out in Hopi land right out of college, and Mina said, "You gotta help the Navajos." I was like, "What happened? Why? What's happening to them?" I didn't know a single Navajo. So that sort of gave me credentials as unbiased, because I came into this from the traditional Hopi point of view. That's getting off the track though. I recall it as we were trying to repeal the law legislatively. Lou Gerwitz was out on the land posturing as the savior of the people legislatively. And so Paul's correct that we made the decision that we have to win an Oscar with this. I mean, it's worth holding it back. We made the Academy deadline by 5 minutes. After 5 years of working on the film, total desperation, the people were counting on us. It was a really, really exhausting, difficult process to complete this whole project, which plays in Navajo. I mean, all the Navajos accurately translated and, you know, what we had to go through. But we finally delivered a dripping print to the Academy 5 minutes before the deadline. And then we sat and waited, because if we won the Oscar, even though we'd have to hold the film back for 4 or 5 months while they're relocating people, then maybe we have a real chance of stopping it. Well, we won the Oscar, and then we started getting phone calls from congressmen saying, "I got 15 postcards today, what do you want us to do?" And then somebody else, "I got 3 postcards today, what?" You know, so much to my surprise, Congress actually was listening. And the lawyer who had been saying he would do the job legislatively disappeared. And so for 6 months, we had to spend what remaining energy we had getting Alan Cranston's son, and finally to Senator Alan Cranston, for those of you who might remember him, on board with this issue. And he wrote a moratorium bill finally, but 6 months had passed. We got 300,000 letters written to Congress saying, "I do not want we went to theaters all over the country with little postcards saying, "Dear Senator Blank, I do not want my tax dollars used to relocate the Navajo." And 300,000, we're told, postcards were written to Congress, and the momentum had moved on. Congress no longer cared. By the time the legislation was ready, it was too late. So the relocation continued and continued until, I swear, I have to talk to people out on the land now to find out, but it seems to me this judge's ruling of January obviates relocation altogether. So those who did fight, these people lost their lives fighting. Roberta Blackgoat, my dear, dear favorite, you just admire the people who stood up and fought and resisted and fought and resisted, and they died fighting. Roberta went to Washington. We saw her in the hotel room before she went to testify at that congressional hearing, and she's ripping her skirt in the motel room. We're like, "Roberta, what are you doing?" "Well, I want them to think I'm poor." She was just a treasure. But anyway, these people really suffered very much, and I respect them. Those who have held out to this day, I have great admiration.